Hi, I usually make video essays analyzing media and shit, but today I just want to talk about video games. Specifically 3 games I personally really enjoy that seem to not be getting enough attention online. These games are not related at all, except they are 1, cool, and 2, underrated. A few thousand reviews on Steam. But without wasting your time, let's get right into it. First up on the list is Cultic by Jason Smith. At first glance, Cultic looks like a long-lost first-person shooter from the 90s, but unlike the games that it's clearly inspired by, Cultic brings modern FPS sensibilities and mechanics along with its retro style. The first mission of Cultic starts with you crawling out of a pit of bodies to seek vengeance against the cultists who assumedly put you there. Initially armed with just an axe, you're thrown right into the brutal action. The graphic style of Cultic borrows heavily from the build engine games of the 90s. My mind goes to Blood as the most apt comparison. Cultic has this sort of blend of 2D pixelated textures mixed with 3D voxels. For the non-nerds here, I just mean everything isn't flat like in the original Doom. Fidelity aside, when it comes to aesthetics, Cultic is pretty damn atmospheric. I really felt immersed exploring the different areas and found myself repeatedly surprised by Cultic's use of lighting and color to break up its levels, but I'll touch on these concepts a bit deeper in the gameplay section. Just know that Cultic is a pretty nice looking game. Just look at that skybox. Shit's beautiful. In regards to sound, Cultic does a decent job crafting its soundscape and sometimes even a fantastic job at it. The guns are punchy and full, which leads to satisfying shooting. But what really takes the cake for me are the enemy sounds. They serve to create some very memorable moments. For example, here's the first time you meet the Chainsaw Psycho. It's absolutely terrifying. Another fantastic sound design moment is in this field when you first encounter the sniper enemies. Both the shots and the ping of the reloads of their snipers ringing from the hills sends a clear message to the player. Holy fuck, I have to get to cover. Now of course you can't talk about sound in a retro shooter without talking about the music. The music in Cultic is pretty good. It's not really what you'd expect from one of these retro boomer shooter indie games. No metal music, but a more cinematic, John Carpenter-esque sound. It subverts the boomer shooter expectations, and I quite liked it. Here's some of my favorites. Alright, let's talk about what everyone wants to hear about. Gameplay. Cultic is hands down one of the best shooters in this genre that I've ever played. And I've played a lot of them. And some of them I have strong opinions about. But Cultic is great. As I mentioned in the intro, Cultic brings a lot of the modern mechanics from FPSs into its retro shell and look. Crouching, sliding, jumping, and rolling. Cultic has just an overall snappy movement system that is really a joy to control. Sliding into a cultist to deliver a 1-2 shotgun blast, jumping across tents to axe off a dude's head, or just plain strafing feels good in this game. In regards to weapons, Cultic breaks the mold in a few ways. For one, Cultic's setting, the mid-1900s, led to its arsenal being a set of firearms we don't typically see. The Mauser sidearm, a Sten machine gun, the odd side-loading FG-42 sniper, relatively obscure World War II weapons that are truly a breath of fresh air in this genre. All of the weapons in Cultic, and I mean all of them, are effective and satisfying to use. I found myself using the starting pistol a lot, even in the last few levels of Chapter 1. This is partly due to Cultic's fantastic upgrade system. Throughout the levels, there are hidden gun parts that can be found and then cached in at workbenches to permanently upgrade your weapons. These upgrades either provide increased stats like improved damage and reload, or functional mods like burst fire and knockback. This upgrade system and the findable weapon parts is such a great addition to the retro shooter formula because it gives so much more weight to secret areas and exploration. Instead of just finding a weapon early like in other shooters, you find an upgrade piece that can give you a unique, tangible advantage. This incentivized me to really look around for secrets because I knew I could go and get some crazy shit like full auto for my sniper rifle. When it comes to enemies in Cultic, they surprisingly vary quite a bit. Initially, I was worried that the game would be just about shooting cultists, but my god, is that not the case. There are a lot of really cool enemies that force you to approach combat differently, especially on the harder difficulties. I don't want to spoil too much, but here are some examples. The possessed floating bedsheet, which uses telekinesis to throw things at you and will crush your brain if you make eye contact with it. Or the previously mentioned chainsaw psycho that will not only chase you around with a chainsaw, but will chuck frag grenades and bear traps at you if you're out of range. Or the redacted in the basement. Another highlight of Cultic's gameplay is the absolutely crazy variety between stages. It's not just fighting in slightly different colored levels, almost every stage of Cultic is designed in a unique way that radically influences how it's played. The first level has a nice blend of indoors, outdoors, and caves, but as we go on, we see completely different approaches to Cultic's level design. Take the Asylum for example. It's dark and dingy and the pace is much slower. You're forced to go from room to room clearing enemies. The atmosphere and enemy placement almost makes it feel like a horror game compared to the first level. Or how about the Catacombs? Another dark and dingy level, but with these unique super narrow hallways filled with water and skeletons that definitely don't come alive. And the Asylum grounds, where we're sieging an encampment of cultists, sniping out guards, climbing roofs, clearing out trenches. Cultic's levels are so much fun to play because they all provide a distinct experience, something that honestly can't be said for a lot of the games in this genre. I played through Cultic in its second hardest difficulty, and it felt just right to me. The game challenged me, enemies weren't bullet sponges, and I had ample ammo and opportunities to take out my foes, but I still had to use cover, put headshots down range, and focus. Balance-wise, there's nothing that feels impossibly hard to deal with, but there are a few things that may be a tad overtuned for the player. My mind goes to the nearly infinite stack of TNT you can carry that can definitely trivialize certain encounters. I think I had about 40 plus at some point. Also, the lever action. This thing is stupid accurate, one-shots a lot of units with a headshot, and it's like the second gun you get in the game. In regards to story in Cultic, it's there. Storytelling definitely takes a backseat to the gameplay in this one, and I think that's okay. Sort of like Doom Eternal or any indie boomer shooter. The story serves as a nice addition to the action. For those inclined, the game does provide notes and typewriter pages around that help give clues to what happened before you showed up, and if you dig deep enough, some interesting lore in the enemies you're fighting. Cultic does also have a survival mode that I've played minimally that has 3 playable stages, but I haven't played enough of it to really have a concrete take. Cultic is $10 on Steam. Technically, you're purchasing episode 1 of Cultic for this $10. Regardless, I think this is a fantastic deal, and I would personally spend more than double that. I got almost 8 hours of really fun gameplay out of Cultic Chapter 1. According to the dev's Twitter, Chapter 2 is coming eventually, and I will patiently wait, because Cultic is truly a banger of a shooter. Alright, let's talk about a slightly wackier title. Bone Razor Minions. If this was a few years ago, I would simply just call Bone Razor Minions a roguelike, which is true, but I think nowadays it's more aptly described as a vampire survivor-like. A top-down, auto-attacking, shoot-em-up, roguelike? Roguelite? I don't know. Regardless, it plays like this. Immediately, most people will notice the fairly rudimentary graphics of Bone Razor. It's literally 8-bit. But don't let that stop you from appreciating Bone Razor's style. It has cohesive sprite work and an aesthetic that doesn't feel like a bunch of ripped assets. Bone Razor's graphics, while simple, are genuinely polished and pull off the indie 8-bit look quite well, which is not a given. Sometimes these games can be pretty ugly to look at. As you would expect from the theme, Bone Razor uses a lot of lo-fi 8-bit sound effects. There's nothing really special when it comes to these sounds. I would describe Bone Razor's audio overall as serviceable, fine, gets the job done. But the soundtrack, now the soundtrack is a whole nother story. The soundtrack is absolutely full of chiptune bangers, and I mean some real slappers. And there's a surprising amount of music here for such a small game. A new track plays every wave of enemies, so any run you might hear 10 plus different tracks. Here are some of my favorites. Just like Vampire Survivors, Bone Razor Minions has a deceptively simple gameplay loop. For those of you not familiar with the genre, you pretty much just move around with WASD in an open area and try to survive an ever-increasing horde of enemies. At first glance, it's almost difficult to imagine how it could be any fun. Unlike other roguelikes, like Binding of Isaac, you don't actively choose who you're attacking. There's no key press needed. Now, unlike Vampire Survivors, which has you auto-attacking with weapons you pick up, you don't attack at all in Bone Razor. Your minions do. See, Bone Razor has you playing a necromancer who is, well, raising bones. Your goal is to create an army of the undead to stop the king's forces from desecrating your graveyard. Being a roguelike, every run is randomized, so almost everything is different each time you play, except for the area, which is chosen before the run starts to determine difficulty. So once you have your area selected, you're dropped into it with a few basic minions. Almost immediately, enemies will start to flood from the corners of the screen. Your minions will automatically get to work to take out your foes, which it's then your job to run over and collect their bones. See, in this world,
the bones are the skeleton's money!
And you need those bones to acquire new minions and upgrade old ones. This is where a lot of Bone Razor's complexity and fun lie. Once you fill your bone meter, you level up, and you're given the decision to choose between 3 different minions. The minions you choose from may be a brand new minion or an upgrade to one you already have. Minions offer either an offensive damage-dealing attack or a buff for you / debuff for your enemies. Your options may be an archer minion who shoots arrows, an augur minion who will hasten all of your other minions' attacks, or an upgrade to your basic minion that'll allow him to do more damage and attack quicker. But see, it goes deeper than just that. Much deeper. Bone Razor has a lot of different minion types. Giant minions, demon minions, ghost bros, plant bros, Meldon minions, wax minions? All which provide different playstyles and effects to help you get farther and farther in your runs. This variety of minions is also the backbone of the playable classes in Bone Razor. Classes usually lean towards a minion type that will help bolster a certain playstyle. Want to spam more of the powerful demon minions on the field? Then use the Demonologist. Want more of the usually scarce giant minions? Then the gangly Grafted is your man, increasing your cap of giants and increasing your max health with every giant you obtain. There are about 10 classes in the game right now that all offer different experiences to play, and it seems like every few weeks the dev adds a new one. Bone Razor also has items. These items come in either relics, which are passive upgrades / abilities, and spells, which serve as an active one-use item that can do things like cast lightning storms and make you invulnerable for a period of time. As I've mentioned, Bone Razor is a roguelike in which every run you restart, but there are a lot of things that persist between runs. In this little hub world that used to be a menu, you can find what to spend Bone Razor's non-bone currencies on. The permanent upgrades exist in 3 categories. The Bone Razor lore, which are just straight upgrades, a dash, more iframes, new minions, higher caps. Then you have the enemy barracks, which is where you can bolster your enemies, which at first read sounds like a non-upgrade, but bolstering your enemies allows for faster bone acquisition. Faster bone acquisition means more minions, and more minions means more power. And the last permanent upgrades are to your classes. Unlike the other 2 upgrades that use gold, these upgrades are with a different currency called souls, and there are about 8 to 12 slots that allow you to empower your character. 1 soul is 1 upgrade. The difference between a fully upgraded class and a fresh one is huge. But yeah, that's pretty much all the mechanics. There's also actual bosses with attacks you have to dodge, which is a step up from Vampire Survivors. And the game actually does have an end to its levels. Bone Razor also technically has a story, but it's sort of just added flavor for the experience. This may be something that gets fleshed out with more updates as the game grows, but this sort of game isn't really designed for some deep and engaging story. And with the game's writing currently just being a lot of sex jokes, I wouldn't be surprised if any additional story was about restoring your boner with some magical potion or something. Bone Razor also has an endless mode and a card game, but I honestly haven't touched either. Overall, Bone Razor is just a lot of fun, and it feels so much more engaging than Vampire Survivors. It's the perfect lunch break game with a run lasting about 20 minutes. There's just so much charm to the game, and it's clear that genuine care was put into its art, mechanics, music, and everything else. It's a fantastic little game for $5, and the dev seems to be releasing updates with fresh content every other week or so. Buy Bone Razor. Do it! Also, all the MP3s are saved in the local folder, so even if you're not going to play it, it's like $5 for a killer chiptune album. Alright, last on the list is Faith. Faith by indie dev Airdorf is a DOS-themed horror game about Christianity. Yes, a horror game that looks like this. Faith is probably the most popular of all the games on here. Its original demo of its first chapter released years ago and got lots of attention from some famous YouTubers. But its full release was last month and it still only has a few thousand reviews on Steam, so I felt like it was important to bring this game back into the light. Faith follows the story of a Vatican priest John on his quest to right a wronged exorcism. A game of guilt, God, and guns? Just like Bone Razor, Faith is another 8-bit style game. However, Faith's simple graphics are attempting to emulate an old DOS game. This simple style is combined with fully rotoscoped cutscenes that add an entirely unique feel to Faith's presentation. Faith does a fantastic job working inside these graphical limits to deliver both a scary and immersive experience. Some of my favorite examples are when the game kills the lights. It's genuinely nerve-wracking trying to whip around in 4 directions, attempting to shine a shitty flashlight to prevent a basement full of demons from ripping your face off. In regards to sound, Faith stays faithful to its inspirations and uses some pretty simple, crunchy sounds that one would expect for a game that looks like this. However, the standout in the sound design here for me are the voices. Faith uses a classic text-to-speech engine that sounds incredibly creepy.
Talk very quickly. Listen to this one. Peter Piper, pick a pickled peppers. How many picks some pickled peppers did Peter Piper pick?
Each character in Faith has their own voice through this text-to-speech engine, which adds a lot of depth to the otherwise monocolored 12 pixels that make up the characters.
I'm looking short with boys. Ned, Jason, Martin. Have you seen them?
The other sound highlight in Faith is the music, which utilizes a lot of retro renditions of classical Christian music and hymns. I could see the religious PTSD flash before my girlfriend's eyes as she started to almost automatically hum the hymn playing on the main menu. The gameplay of Faith is pretty simple. It's a top-down horror game that has you controlling your character with WASD, exploring different open areas. You play as John the Priest after the events of a botched exorcism you were part of. I really don't want to spoil too much here about Faith, but the story follows a sort of uncovering of a satanic conspiracy. And the actual gameplay loop of Faith is essentially explore the area, exercise things to find notes, and try to not get killed by any scary guys, which there will be many of. Chapter 1 ends with your first boss fight, and these fights are where most of the mechanics in Faith are experienced, having to use your exercising skills now with a bit of dodging and timing. It's a nice challenge to mix up the exploring and reading you'll have been doing up until this point. Faith is separated into 3 different chapters, with each chapter getting longer and more convoluted than the last. As you progress, you'll be met with more demons and bosses, but I don't want to go too deep into here for spoiler reasons. But every time the game throws new enemies at you, they usually have a unique way that they need to be dispatched or avoided. This adds a lot of tension and fear to the encounters. The story of Faith takes place over its 3 chapters and has different endings that can be accomplished in each one. However, I would say each chapter definitely seems to have a canonical ending that can be determined by certain characters being alive in the next chapter or events being mentioned, etc. There are also a lot of optional notes that can be found in each chapter that help shed light on the story and the characters in it. I would highly recommend searching for as many notes as you can. Faith seems pretty genuine in its use of Christianity. There may be some tongue-in-cheek implications here being set in the satanic panic, but in this world, the job of a priest in exorcising is a seriously fucking important one. The main character, John, seems to be a genuinely good person who is struggling with following his religious duties, but also righting any wrongs that he can, regardless of what the church wants. I know this review is shorter than the 2 others in this video, but that's not because Faith isn't as good or I'm not as passionate about it. I could truly go on about Faith all day, but it's a game that is truly enjoyed blind or close to it in my opinion. Unlike the two other games, Faith is almost all about its story and atmosphere, not gameplay. It's important I don't share all the scary, juicy details or it'll ruin the fun. Because I could definitely tell you about this, or this, or this, but I won't. Buy it. Elevator friend? For $15, you get the whole game, which will probably get you around 7 hours of content, maybe 9 if you go for all the endings and optional notes and such. Faith is a game full of passion that I can't recommend enough. Faith's interesting use of the Christian religion in a very candid way for its story is unique to the horror genre, and I anticipate seeing what abominations its developer Airdorf crafts next. And with that concludes my game suggestions. These are all games I truly enjoyed that I think need more attention from gamers like you.